Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Signal with Snorlax. We try to do exactly what the title says, find some signal in a market that, at least for crypto, has been obviously a little bit unpredictable over the second half of 2025. And as we've even come into the beginning of the new year, right? 2026 has started off with this great pump in crypto. I'm sure we're all asking ourselves the question, is this the bottom? Is this a sustainable pump? Or are we potentially about to see lower pricing, whether that be after a further pump or just right now, right? And a lot of that's going to come down to equity markets. Like I said, we're going to do our best to find some signal throughout all this noise that we've been seeing in markets. See, I've been, talking about the possibility of a melt up coming to markets. And, in many ways, I think what Bitcoin does from here could communicate that duality, right? Like, are we going to see equities finally catch up, right? Or was it just a meme that equities, like at this point, it's been almost 3 months since crypto topped and had its big downtrend. Equities have thus far not followed suit. We haven't really seen that. At least, people like to use past examples, specifically from like 2022, as a reason why Bitcoin and crypto selling off will kind of lead equity market downside. But if you look back at those instances, it was about a 4 to 6 week lag sometimes, like at most. It wasn't 3 months. So I would be a little bit skeptical on blindly betting on equities to go down from here, especially when they are roofing in this way. And look, the things that are showing strength in the equity markets are a little bit different. And I guess I can kind of start with just like a brief overview of my read on equities here. Because it kind of does paint the whole dichotomy between what we're seeing with equities and what we're seeing with crypto. It's like we've seen tech begin to show discernible weakness here, but at the same time, what is pumping? Why is the S&P so strong? Why is it moving higher? Because you have these fundamentally stronger assets finally beginning to pump. You're seeing banks pump. We've seen healthcare pump over the last few weeks. We're seeing industrials start to perk up, oil, commodities, kind of more of these like economically driven valuations showing strength. Are we going to see that continue, right? While we see the S&P potentially continue to move higher, or are we going to see this divergence that we haven't just seen hit Bitcoin, but it is starting to hit some of these larger tech stocks as well, right? We look at it, Nvidia, for example, showing weakness. We look at a Tesla, for example, showing lots of weakness. And I think this one in particular is one that I'm getting more and more bearish on. Are we going to see that divergence between big tech and the broader equity market continue? Because to me, that will tell us a lot. At the very least, I think if that divergence continues, we can still see Bitcoin diverge further from equity markets, right? If that's going to be the case, if the things that are fundamentally pushing the S&P higher are going to be different than tech, and tech sells off despite the fact that equities continue to climb. And to be clear, I don't think that's like a super likely scenario that you just see the S&P melt face without big tech participating. Then that's going to hit Bitcoin, and it's going to hit crypto in the same way. But we clearly have, we know we have this divergence between equities and Bitcoin. The question is, what do you think equities are going to do next? Right? Are we about to really get a melt up? And I've been obviously posting on X kind of some of my more bullish, not necessarily targets, but the structure that I see the S&P trading in right now is actually very similar to the structure that we saw on Bitcoin on a higher time frame, which, if it's playing out, I think we would be maybe somewhere in here, right, before kind of this last leg higher. But then, what I would have to reckon with is, do I really think that we can do that without crypto participating? And the answer is no. I don't think that that's very likely. It's not impossible, but I just don't think it's very likely. So, when we talk about bulls versus bears and this tightrope that crypto's watching or walking rather, right? The appropriately titled video, I hope. What is Bitcoin going to do here? Because we've heard it multiple times this cycle, but it's like, oh, well, if equities have a hiccup, crypto's going to dump really hard. Is this time different in the sense that that sentiment is right? And we do see equities maybe put in some sort of I'm not going to call it a long-term top necessarily, but some sort of sell-off. And we would just have to see what that would do to Bitcoin. But I think that's a good spot for me to rotate over to crypto, because I probably will revisit stocks here at some point in the video. But I mean, Bitcoin has sold off, right? I mean, we've been talking about it for weeks. We topped in early October. We've been in a mechanical downtrend. We still have not broken out of that downtrend, for the record. We are seeing some pretty discernible strength to start the year, specifically from altcoins. I mean, a Pepe, for example, gave you this huge move. But is this huge move just kind of like a bearish retest before we see trend resumption, or have these altcoins bottomed? And I think if that's the case, you know, it might not translate necessarily to immediate impulsive upside on Bitcoin, but it would probably translate to, you know, we've hit an area of value. And I think at the very least, you can kind of expect like some grindy chop here for a bit to continue while Bitcoin forms a base. But more importantly, that the downside is probably mostly capped if altcoins have already bottomed against USD, for example. But the flip side of that to me is if these were just squeezes, and this is the best Bitcoin can do, right? A squeeze into 94K. I mean, my trigger for risk on behavior has been the exact same thing that it's been for weeks now. Break these highs. I'll get very, very bullish on crypto again. I do not believe in the extended shoulder scenario. I don't think that there are really any comparisons to 2022, at least not outside of crypto. I mean, I'm sure you could point to some structural similarities, specifically on like a Bitcoin, and say, yeah, you know, we look a little bit like we did in 2022, but Bitcoin dominance, volatility, equities are all drastically different than they were in 2022. So I don't really like the 2022 comparison. Not to mention that, you know, we didn't print an egregious amount of money before this cycle. We did that in 2020, but not before this cycle. So I don't really think there are many applicable analogs to 2022. When you hear me talk about the binary nature of how I think Bitcoin's going to trade from here, this is going to explain it. We've been in this range, and to me, this is either a shoulder before complete capitulation, right, where we have been unable to break these highs thus far. I think this rejection is very bearish, actually, so far. But that's not to say that it's not damning yet. I think as long as you're above 88 to 90K, you know, you can still prospect further upside. Don't have to get overly bearish. In fact, I would argue it kind of makes sense to be kind of tactically bullish on a few of these altcoins, of which, you know, I'll talk about a handful of them. But yeah, if we break down from here, I don't know where I'm going to try and bid. I really don't. And I don't think that you're going to, like, unless you get something that would look like a quick sweep of the lows with a big buyback, and I mean a big buyback, then I would just not be interested in bidding. Not until the market can show me where it wants to find support, because I don't know where this would bottom, truthfully, if this was not the low and this value that we've established since does not hold. So I need to get that out there. The flip side is, you know, I think a bullish scenario probably does look like some more chop up here, a slow grind back to the highs where we have at like every price level where people would be expecting a shoulder to form. So like 102, like 108, you have a reaction there, but it ends up becoming this higher low before you continue to trade higher. I think that would be the most bullish scenario. We talk about an asset class in crypto that is very much the black sheep of the rest of the market. You know, there's a beta with lower risk, sexier narratives right now. That's just the reality. We know that crypto changes these things when it goes up, but it needs to climb that wall of worry before we can start talking about impulsive upside. If we were to see like a really impulsive pump into like 100K, then I would maybe get a little bit more on board with the shoulder idea, because impulsive moves from this structure to me imply more of a short squeeze than a rush to bid. And I think a certain level of skepticism is not only healthy, but should be expected on crypto after the last 6 months, really after the last year of what we've seen. So a slow grind, ironically, I think a slow grind higher here would be much better than an aggressive, impulsive move. And if equities are going to be melting up, then I think that Bitcoin will largely trade in tandem with the S&P from an ROI standpoint. It would be later on in 2026 that we would see a real decoupling between those two assets. But if this was the best that we can do, if this was the best that we can do here on Bitcoin, that is a bad sight. And I'm going to have to get pretty bearish on Bitcoin, regardless of what equity markets are going to do in the meantime, right? I wouldn't even say that like the VIX looks that constructive here. Maybe this bid that we've seen lately, and this is a potential reclamation of the trend, but even still, I wouldn't say that I'm expecting like as fast of a spike as we got in April or August of last year anymore. Or I guess it was 2024. That was like a year and a half ago. Geez. I wouldn't say that I'm expecting that large of an impulse, just like straight up in a straight line in the same way that we saw here, unless you have like some really major headline risk, which is possible, certainly possible. But it would make more sense to me that this probably needs a little bit more time before you get super bullish on it. I think if you are a bear, it makes more sense to me to pick on some of these weak individual names, which we can talk about now. I mean, I mentioned Tesla earlier in the video. I know that we have like this, it's still technically in an uptrend. So I do think that needs to be said. This kind of looks like IWM actually, now that I'm looking at it. Not exactly the same, but somewhat. I just think the technicals on this are poor. It looks like it's losing momentum to me. Weak breakout here. This is probably a really good short in equities. And I guess that does kind of touch on what I mentioned earlier in the video. Like we're seeing this divergence between tech and other sectors that make up the S&P, which is why we see the divergence between the Dow Jones and QQQ. But yeah, I mean, I think this is an individual name I would say I'm pretty bearish on, and one that I am really bearish on is Coinbase. It's been the case since like up here. I just don't like Coinbase. I feel I've said this before publicly. I've said this in these videos. Every single one of Coinbase's competitive advantages is done better by somebody else. And if you name one, think about it a little bit harder. I'm sure you could find somebody who does it better, either natively or in TradFi. I mean, you can point to someone like a Robinhood, or any exchange that does not have fees as high as Coinbase. There's not really any benefit to trading on Coinbase versus another exchange. It lost its edge in American markets, in my opinion, with the advent of all of these American ETFs. Really, what helps Coinbase the most here is that it's still like the dark pools largely facilitated, or that facilitate the ETF volume, are largely done on Coinbase, which you could argue is bearish. It's going to be very reflexive with what equities do from here, but really what Bitcoin is going to do. Because if you ever have an outsized move down, Coinbase is going to be a big, big loser because of the way they kind of execute this volume on the back end. It's very, I won't get too deep into the details, but it's a little bit shady. Or at the very least, there's a very large level of obfuscation that's almost unintentionally. And I have tweeted about this before. Just check my Twitter, search my Twitter for like Coinbase tweets if you want more explanation on it. I won't go too deep into it, but I am kind of bearish on this chart. And if Bitcoin is breaking down, I think this is a really good individual name to be looking to short. And it probably has an IV on the options that's a little bit lower than Bitcoin, so worth considering as well. Anyway, those were just some weak individual names. I think NVIDIA looks pretty weak too, but I don't really want to short it here. We haven't talked about ETH and Sol yet, which paint an important picture here as well. They are just like Bitcoin in the sense that if you're losing this shoulder, it's a grisly sight. But Sol did tell you before the new year the market was going to pump. At least it was going to pump altcoins. We got these really fat finger wicks a few days before the market went and made this move. Sol is still signal, and I'm going to tell you here's some lower time frame signal. I think we're going to see Sol trade probably a little bit higher on a lower time frame, back into these local highs that we put in. I don't know if it was yesterday or Tuesday, and if we reject from this retest, I think you have a pretty like highly actionable short potentially brewing there. You have to be careful. Now you have to be really careful with the way a lot of these altcoins are squeezed. You can look at a Pepe, a Sui. There are a lot of altcoins that ripped really hard to start the new year. So a certain level of caution as far as like invalidation needs to be had. But if you do see this come up into these highs and reject again, then I think you would probably be ready to see a downtrend in crypto, which means coins are short. I'm just generally thinking that we're not going to see the divergence between crypto and equities continue. So if we do see a rejection on Sol, maybe that is a sign that equities are going to continue to like, they've just been consolidating, but maybe they would show legitimate weakness and start to potentially break down from this range that we've been trading in. But hey, maybe the divergence just continues. Maybe it just continues. Not that that is something that I expect, but as far as Sol ETH goes, I think this found a low. I've been talking for a while about how I wanted to see a double bottom form, and like being honest with you guys, this looks really, really good for a double bottom to form, which makes me think, all right, Sol's probably going to outperform ETH from here. Next step is, what does that mean for USD pricing? Well, we know what happened when Sol ETH went straight down over the summer. We saw ETH move up like 200%, 250%. Does that imply we're going to see the market move down from here? Something that we're going to have to think about, or at the very least kind of observe here over the next few weeks. Lastly, I think we should talk about some of these privacy coins. Zcash looks weak on a lower time frame, right? I'm not really trading this right now just because I think the flows into these privacy coins are fairly idiosyncratic. They're not really trading super correlated with the rest of the crypto market. So for that reason, like if you're trying to long or short these altcoins as beta to the market, you're probably doing it wrong. What I do know though, is that Zcash really throughout this whole uptrend was negatively correlated with the crypto market. Negatively correlated. So we were going down while Zcash was going higher. You can say this is probably like a capital flight into privacy coins. Well, I'm looking at XMR right now, and I have to say, I think this is the best looking coin in the market. I think it looks pretty damn bullish, and it really looks a lot to me like this move we saw on silver. And I'd say Monero is like somewhere in here, right? In the same way we have like this move and vertical accumulation into a big vertical candle. I think XMR looks very similar to this. Are we going to see the market trade in the same way that it did when Zcash was pumping? If Monero is really about to give you like this huge momentous breakout and maybe like double in a few weeks, which I think is what the silver fractal would imply if it's going to play out. Never just trade explicitly off of fractals. I know it's funny for me to say that, but you need to be really careful using them. They're more contextual than they are exact replicas of what you're going to see play out. Is the privacy coin narrative again going to tell us there's a capital flight out of crypto and into these privacy coins? I think it's another thing that we have to think about. There are some signs to me that in crypto, like when we look at Monero, when we look at Sol ETH, and when I look at Coinbase, they look like crypto wants to go lower. Equities, to me, though, this is the duality, right? Like the tightrope. Equities can, in theory, still save crypto and I think drag it higher from here. And that's the real question, right? Are equities going to melt up, or are we going to see a really big breakdown in that market? I would say I'm still leaning bullish on equities, right? I'm positioned in some deeply out of the money calls on the S&P for 2027, but I would say I'm kind of more and more favoring that there's probably downside coming for crypto, especially if this is the best that we could do. The most underallocated I think people have been to crypto in a very long time, with probably the worst sentiment that I've seen since I entered crypto. Like it's bad. And I think it's worse than 2022 at this point. I mean, that would be a very, very big sign of weakness for Bitcoin. So Last thing I want to talk about is related to USD-JPY. Why am I talking about this? Well, we know the yen carry trade is a very fundamentally important part of markets. To me, this looks like it's going to break out. It looks a lot like this looks a lot like ETH's previous cycle to me, right? Where you had the very impulsive high, you had the slow grind up, second high, sweep, shoulder. Now you're seeing that that like consolidation at, I think it was like 1800, 2000 before it ended up getting cut in half. This structure looks very similar to me, which makes me think, are we going to see this pair really rip out of this horizontal? And if that's the case, I mean, at that point, it comes down to context. Why would this pair be ripping if that's what we're seeing? And at face value, I'm like, okay, well, 2020, really since the bear market lows, so this pair going higher has been correlated to market upside. If this rips, are we going to see, at the very least, are we going to see equities rip higher? But I guess if the context is explicitly like bearish the yen because of maybe something that happens geopolitically, who knows? Or just very bullish dollar, because let's be honest, there are a lot of moving parts geopolitically right now that kind of seem to be converging increasingly after everything that happened in Venezuela last week. Are we going to see movements in China and Taiwan soon? Are we going to see movements in Greenland, Iran, et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot going on right now. Are we going to see an outsized move higher from the dollar? So we'll just have to see. We'll really have to see. I think there are risks in the market. I am more bullish on equities than I am crypto. I would be surprised if the divergence between crypto and equities continues to steepen. And another reason I would be a little bit surprised if that relationship steepens is because Bitcoin has ironically been trading very closely correlated to the odds for Republicans to win the House back in 2026. So that's a little bit of like, I think, I don't know if that's alpha or not, but there is some correlation there. So yeah, I would be surprised if the divergence kind of continues there for a lot of reasons, but I'm still cautiously bullish on equities. Crypto is just, man, crypto's tough right now. It's really, really tough. If Bitcoin breaks down from here, though, to me, that's a very clear bearish trade. And I'm not really somebody who thinks that we're going to stop at like 70K, a sweep of these lows, and then like that's it. I think if you got that, we're probably talking about much lower, unfortunately. So this is very much a put up or shut up time for crypto. Let me be clear. I think that we can be saved by equity markets potentially entering a melt up. But crypto needs a lot of work. Crypto needs a lot of work, and we clearly have a divergence, whether or not you think it's because of liquidity, whether or not you think it's because of October 10th. What should have happened for crypto has not happened. You know, we're not consolidating at like 120K in the same way that we're seeing the S&P effectively do this. So there's very much like this fine line that crypto's walking here, where we're kind of hanging on the edge of a cliff. But at the same time, you know, we can just as easily look back 2 or 3 months down the line and say, all right, well, we slow grinded back towards the highs. Now it's time for the impulsive move higher. And the melt up that we were talking about in equities did in fact save crypto. So, you know, I really think we'll just have to see. As far as how I'm playing it personally, you know, I think there are a handful of alts that look good for upside. I'm personally going to prioritize the one that has these idiosyncratic flows, right? That's outsized strength against the rest of the crypto market. It's not correlated to Bitcoin. XMR is kind of my favorite. The easiest way for me to be long equities without risking too much capital is to be long, I think, some of these deeply out of the money call options, because again, if you've seen kind of what I think a melt up would look like, they're just mispriced. They're flat out mispriced relative to how much they would mark up in a situation like that. But yeah, I mean, again, it's like I said, if we start to break down, if this was the best Bitcoin could do, crypto's a short, and it doesn't matter what equities do next. Crypto would just be, in my opinion, like a brain dead a brain dead downtrend. That's probably going to see continuation in that case. So we're walking a tightrope. I hope you guys enjoyed Signal with Snorlax. I know I covered a lot of different topics today. I hope it wasn't too scatterbrained with how I approached it, but that's how I'm viewing things. It's very binary right now. We're going to melt up. We're going to melt down. Kind of already used that title in the Signal with Snorlax a few weeks ago, I think. So I wanted to change this one a bit more. I mean, Bitcoin's either like brewing towards a much larger sell-off coming throughout 2026, or this is the bottom and we're going to see equities drag it higher. That is the most that I'm able to make sense of the price action that we're seeing right now. But I hope it helps you guys. Gave you some maybe actionable trades to be taking in the future. How you structure them is up to you. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Signal with Snorlax. Thank you again for tuning in. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. And I'll be back next week. With hopefully more clarity on what the directionality of the market's going to be. Either way, I'll try to provide some signal. But y'all have a great rest of your day. And as always, stay safe.